Hi, thank you for coming. Andreas Krohn is my name, and I've been working with APIs for a long time, at least for a long time in API age. It's 10 years almost now. And I'm here to talk about the API lifecycle. So from the start of an idea, all the way through writing code, to getting to production, to retiring the API and saying goodbye, hopefully welcome and hi to a new one, or just kill it off because it didn't work. The whole lifecycle of an API. And how do you start with the lifecycle on API? Well, you, of course, start with looking at cars. Traditional products, cars, blenders, houses, the chairs you're sitting on. Those have a lifecycle as well. You have an idea. You design things. Somebody at IKEA is sitting in their CAD program, copying somebody else, and then it's sent out to a production in Poland that does a chair. We buy it, and then that's it. We have a chair. If something goes wrong with the chair, something was wrong in production, too bad, we have a chair. That's it. Once you bought it, once it's sold, that's kind of the handover to the owner, and it can't be updated after that. If you're a big car company, you can recall all your cars. It's not really good financially or for your reputation. You can recall it and fix things, but you can't just send out the mechanic to every single owner of the car, at least not if you have some kind of volume to fix it. So once it's sold, you can't update it. And that's an important thing to remember throughout this lifecycle talk. But if we look at software, the traditional software has been, here you go, here's a floppy drive, or here's a CD-ROM, or whatever physical media it was distributed on. And then that's it, it wasn't updated. But we're now in the internet age. We have software as a service. Very nice. Software as a service, you use it every day. We have Dropbox, we have Gmail, you have Salesforce. There's software as a service for the enterprise, privately for everybody. That's, if you build something new today, it's probably software as a service somehow. The life cycle looks a bit different. You have an idea, you design it, you go into production, and once you're done with initial production, and people start using it, you can continue fixing things. You better actually continue fixing things, because if there's a bug, people have the expectation that this will be fixed quite soon. If Google finds something wrong with Gmail, they fix it, they probably don't even tell you. And they move around tabs and all kinds of things because they add new features. They don't just fix bugs. So once it's delivered, it's not done. The updates are continuous, and that's a big difference from the traditional products. That's a huge difference. That's a game changer. The product is never done. It has a constant life. So take this traditional products and SaaS, and we start thinking about APIs. Those are much more like SaaS products than as traditional products because you can continue fixing them, right? APIs is kind of a software as a service. The code is running on service you have access to, you can change. You have this similar life cycle to SaaS. You have an idea, you go into design, you have production, and you can continue fixing things. But compared to SaaS products, there are a couple of critical differences that you have to keep in mind. The first one is that an API is a building block. Somebody else is trusting you to continue to deliver this service so much that they build it into their own systems. So it's not just, here's a product, start using it, but here's a piece of the big puzzle you're building. Here's a Lego block, here's a brick, build with this, use it. And that requires a lot of trust. So basically, you have outsourced, or the people building the end solution have outsourced part of that solution to you. And that has impacts on the whole life cycle, huge impacts. That leads us to another challenge. Machines are not flexible. People are. If Google changed something in Gmail and tabs move around or whatever, you can adapt because people are flexible. But machines are not so flexible. You can build in some flexibility. You can use hypermedia and so forth. You can have some flexibility when it comes to APIs. But in general, machines are quite stupid. They do exactly what we tell them to do. The problem is mostly that we don't understand what we told them to do. And this has huge implications. So if we have APIs that are building blocks, they require a lot of trust from the user, and they're used by machines. Machines are consuming these, so they're not flexible. This impacts the life cycle. And the life cycle has 4 main phases. Similar to many other products, and I'm going to go through these and highlight what I think is different for APIs. The first one is analyze. You need to analyze what's the need, what's the requirement. I have a problem that might be fixed by an API. Well, let's make sure it can be fixed by an API before I spend any resources in actually doing it. How does this API fit into my business model? How do I make money from this? Is this a core offering of my company, or is it an addition to an existing business, for example? How will it be designed? And you need to start asking questions. Who, what, how, by whom, how much money, what scale, how many users will you have? Is it enough with one server, or do we need to build up a huge infrastructure, probably on somebody else's cloud platform to handle this? What's the technology needed to be used? I noticed that I asked about business model before technology. I suspect many people in here write code for a living. Sorry, but you still need to ask about the business model first. It's much more fun to just write code, but get the business model right before you start. You need to ask these questions. And you need to ask questions about potential users. What technology do they prefer? Do they prefer SOAP? Do they prefer REST? Do they prefer handwritten letters? Whatever they want to use and pay you for, that's what you should deliver, right? Set goals and decide on what metrics you're going to deliver on. Ask these questions and validate. It's basically lean startup approach. You need to validate things before you spend resources. There's quite a few tools to do mock-ups of APIs. So you don't need to code very much. You configure a mock-up tool and you have a fake API that you can start using and maybe let your potential customers or internally in your organization, let them use it. You can use documentation for this. I'm involved in a startup called Overview News where we index news from all over the world and make that available to developers through an API. The first thing we did with our API was that I wrote the API documentation and send it out to potential users. And got a lot of feedback that maybe we should change this, maybe that. So documentation first works very well for APIs as well. And then mock-up and then testing and so forth. But validate it and validate your business ideas within your company. Get the organization on board. Once you've done all this, you validate it, you have great ideas, you know what to do, what to build. Well, it's time to build it, right? Time to write the code. Similar to other development. You already know what to build, you know if it's REST, you know if it's SOAP, you know hypermedia, JSON, XML, scaling, you know all these things already. And in the development, there's again a couple of things that are extra important for APIs. The first one is access control. You will hear a lot more about this later today, but it's basically who has the right to do what with our API. How do we authorize people? How do we authenticate people? And here comes technologies like OAuth, and API keys is one tool you can use here. There's SAML, there's lots of different tools you can use here. But you need to be careful about this, even if it's just supposed to be internally in your organization. Sooner or later, somebody outside is going to sniff this API out and start using it. And then you better be able to shut them off or at least know that they're doing it, or prevent them from doing it if that's what you want to do. You also need to document. The number one complaints on APIs from developers is that the documentation sucks. And if anybody ever has used Facebook's APIs, you know exactly what this means. The API, maybe the documentation is not updated as quickly as the code. Maybe you're missing code examples. Maybe it's just lacking. Write the documentation at the same time as the code. It's not as fun, but it needs to be done. Absolutely. There's tools like API management tools can help you with this. It can help you with access control as well. So an API management solution is worth looking at, maybe already in analysis phase, because they can help you with a lot of common problems from API project to API project. There's tools like Swagger, readme.io, and so forth that can help you make the publishing and formatting of the documentation easier. But it still needs to be written. It doesn't work that the code is the documentation, unfortunately. That would be nice. All this documentation, and access control, and it all comes down to machines are not flexible. If the track continues all the way up to the wall, the train will go through the wall. You need to know how you're going to handle changes. And you need to know it up front. And you need to communicate this with people that use your API. This is absolutely critical to your success, because whatever you do in the first time around, you will have missed things in your API. There will be bugs, there will be missing features, technology change. You need to know how you're going to manage changes. How are you going to minimize downtime? Will you have new versions, or will this API never, ever, ever change? Will you have a new unique API to each user? Maybe that makes sense for your individual solution. Who knows? This needs to be dealt with. It's a complicated issue, but it cannot be ignored because it's going to punish you bad. So, you have analyzed the API. You know what you got to do. You know the business model. You know the technical requirements. You've written the code. The initial code, I should say. Time to go into operations. It's in production. Great, you're done, right? Code done. I've shipped. Well, not really. This is where the fun begins. Because this is the time when you need to start getting users. You need to start thinking about marketing. If this is an internal API, private API only used within your organization, this is easy. You call the guy in the next office, or maybe you are the only user of your own API, it's done, right? You have a user, and it's me. Perfect, I'm going to build an iPhone app based on my own API. If it's a partner API that just a few selected partners use, you call them. You call 5 people that start using your API, it's a success, I'm done. If it's a public API, open for anybody, at least anybody prepared to pay for it, you have a lot of marketing to do. You come to events like this and speak. You arrange or go to hackathons. You have API evangelists. There's lots of things you can do to market API, but it needs to be done. Because if you don't have any users, whatever metric you decided on in the analysis phase, at least one of the metrics is that somebody should use the API. And if you fail with marketing, nobody's going to use it. So don't ignore this one. You have users. Great. Users have a very annoying tendency of finding bugs in code. That's the main problem of users. So you need to fix those bugs continuously. You need to update things. And since you already know how to manage changes, this should be no problem. A SaaS product is never done. An API is never done. However, a SaaS product has flexible users, and your API does not. So you can fix small bugs, but you can't make any changes that will break any implementation using your API. That might even include fixing bugs, actually. I worked with a client that had an encoding problem, good old encoding, that the user started work around. So when they fixed the encoding problems, lots of applications broke because they had worked around the problem. So it kind of needed to continue to have the bug until there was a new version when it can be fixed. So this is not easy, but it needs to be done. Facebook have gone from move fast and break things as a slogan, and I did move fast, and oh yes, did I break things, to move fast with stable infrastructure. So they have stable up there. They're very important for them to be stable for people building stuff on the API, because it's all about trust. Trust can take years to build and seconds to destroy. So you need to do this. And to sum all this up, it's all about talking with people. Marketing, talking to people. Continuous updates, absolutely talking to developers. You need press release to reach marketeers. You need release notes to reach developers, but you need to talk to them all the time. They will tell you if something is wrong. They will tell you if you fixed it. They will tell you if they need something else. You need to talk to people. You've done all this, fantastic, success. But just as this guy's solution, sooner or later it's time to retire your API. In the worst case, it hasn't worked. You don't have users. Okay, fine, let's try something else. But in the best case, you have a lot of users that come with new requirements. You need to enter new markets. You need to have new functionality. You have bugs that you need to fix that are actually going to introduce breaking changes. then you need to retire your current API and move on to an improved version. New and improved. There are several ways of doing this. You can have an API that never, ever, ever changes, specifically if the API is used a lot in hardware. That's not going to be updated. If there's firmware out there on thousands of Samsung TVs that's using your API, there will be a problem updating it because Samsung is not going to spend a dime on updating all those clients. So you're stuck. That should be dealt with already when you think about how you're going to manage changes. And that has actually just happened. YouTube, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, released version 3 of their API and said that version 2 will stop working in 2015, about 2-3 weeks ago. You have plenty of time. You have years to fix this. Well, some people didn't, especially the ones that have delivered clients that are installed on big TVs and so forth. They haven't fixed it. So YouTube turned off version 2 of their API that they've told people for years this is going to go away. And it breaks applications. People are not happy. That's the price to pay for popularity. And I still think that YouTube did everything well. Google is quite good at announcing changes, but it still has a price. So what I'm talking about here is basically versioning. You start with one car. It's not very well painted, but it's at least a car, right? It's illegal because it doesn't have any lights, but it's a car. I have my first car. It's cheap. It works. But sooner or later, I need to have a car that looks a bit better. Actually, it's legal to drive. You need to upgrade. And that's what versioning is all about. That's what YouTube did with their going from version 2 to version 3. You can have versions on the whole API or on individual operations or individual parts of your API. It's all up to you. But somehow you need to be able to tell users that this thing will stop working sooner or later and you should use this instead. Versioning is far from perfect. It's really difficult to do, but in many cases it's the best solution. And if you do this, you should just use version 3 instead of version 2. You need to deprecate version 2. Say, as Google did, this API will stop working on this date. You have years to do the transition. So you probably will have 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 versions of your API alive at the same time, but with a set kill date, basically. Please don't have that date a week or 2 in the future. Communicate ahead of time. That was the API lifecycle. So to summarize, you analyze requirement and business requirement. You implement. And this is both implementing code and everything around it, API license, pricing, marketing material for that matter, everything. You go into production, you market, you get users, and sooner or later it's time to retire. So, not rocket science, but there are a few key points I want to highlight before I end that I've mentioned, but it's really important for you to take away when you have your API, when you develop your API, or maybe you already have an API in production. And the first one is analyze constantly. To make it look better and have a nice graphic, the analyze phase was first. And then you're done with your analysis and you go into development and then your operations. That's not the way it really looks. You need to analyze constantly. Look at your logs, look at feedback, look at potential new features. Analyze the business model. Maybe we shouldn't charge per request because that actually makes people avoid using our API. We should instead have all you can eat for this price. Analyze everything constantly and update everything constantly. Carefully, but constantly. We live in a time where we can deliver a product and still fix it afterwards. That is fantastic. It's not just deliver a product and we're done. You bought it. You broke it, you bought it, it's fine. It's not my problem. I've delivered a chair. Oh yeah, never mind it. You can't sit on it anymore. I delivered it. You paid for it. You can fix things. You can keep your customers happy. Remembering that machines are not flexible. They do exactly what we tell them to do. It's just that we have no clue what we told them to do. They don't adapt as easy as we do. And that's if you take anything away from this, it's that machines are not flexible and that you need to manage changes with that in mind. That's very important. So thank you very much for your time. If you have more questions, I'm around all day long. You can mail me at andreas@dopter.se, and if you're interested in News API, check out overviewnews.com. Thank you very much for your time.